My name is Brian Finley. I'm the owner of California Property Inspections. I do building inspections on homes, buyers, sellers, commercial, residential, litigation, and forensic inspections. If you ever walk into the house on a listing and you feel the floor is unlevel, all right, that's the number one thing I'm looking for when I walk in. Anywhere where the drainage is not correct, I don't care where you're at. If you don't drain the water right, you're gonna have a foundation problem. The sellers never really know that, and they don't know. And they'll tell you, well, we've been here for 30 years, I've raised my kids here. Great story, right? It doesn't matter. Because I walk around, if I feel like I'm walking uphill and downhill, that's a huge red flag. The first thing I'm gonna do is go and look for a foundation problem because it's there somewhere. When they pour the foundations, they're level. They're always level. New flooring, that's the first. Another thing I look for, I was just in a flip today, has brand new flooring and the floors are unlevel. Are they gonna tell me they don't know anything about it? Of course they are. We didn't live here, we don't have to disclose that. It's all BS. They have to disclose it. The flippers are on the hook for 10 years.
I've had cases where agents have called me and say, hey, you want to buy this house, it's got this broken foundation. And then I'll say, yeah, great, but it's going to cost me X to fix it. And then she'll tell me, oh, this other flipper says they'll fix it for Y. And I'm like, that's not possible because the foundation fix alone is that amount. That means they're not going to fix the foundation and sell it. I was like, are you okay with disclosing to the future buyer on the relist that there was a foundation when she sold it to the flipper? What do you think about that, AJ? So if the seller tells you there's a foundation issue, the agent on the visual inspection says there's a foundation issue, and on the flip side, then they're selling it and say, hey, we don't know about any foundation issue.
Then they're going to have a problem.
Got it. Okay, check it.
And of course they're going to have a problem.
Okay. Okay.
If you don't control the drainage, that's gonna happen. It's gonna crack the foundation. And they sink, they move, we've seen them sink, we've seen all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's always related to the same thing. It's drainage. If you go to ancient Egypt, if you look at the base of the pyramid, you'll see drainage. If you go to ancient Greece, you'll see drainage. Well, there's a reason for that. It's undefeated. So that's kind of where it gets into. Movement, as far as you go, I do inspections in LA. I was a quarter mile from the San Andreas Fault, and I look at their foundation, not one crack. And that house was built in 1903. It saw all 7 major earthquakes, and it didn't crack it. Why? Because the drainage is correct. I've had the agents call me and say it's fine. Okay, that's not okay. It's not okay. I'm not an engineer. I'm not allowed to say it's fine. As a building inspector, state law in California, only an engineer can determine that. I can say, yep, that's the foundation, and yep, it's cracked. Am I allowed to say it's okay? No. An engineer has to say that. Right, AJ?
Biting this tongue.
People really, really lose it over this, and it's really easy to fix this. When it's shattered like glass, that's a repour. Those start at about $80,000, but not something you have to worry about. That's something I'm going to catch when I show up.
Brian, that only takes care of the foundation, but what doesn't solve is the drainage issues,
Correct.
which is additional. And then if there's retaining walls as well, that's expensive as well. So like an average 6-foot tall retaining wall is about $100 a foot to fix. So if you've got 50 feet of retaining wall, yeah, it's $50,000 on average just for one section of a 6-foot tall.
You are, as a buyer side, you have what's called a non-delegable fiduciary obligation. And so you don't get to make that level of mistake.
Moving along, you're walking into the house, jagged cracking like you see right here. That's clearly an indication that the building twisted. There is no other reason that this is going to happen is if the building twisted. It's not like it's settled or moved, it's actually twisting, and you're going to see jagged cracking like this. That's a huge red flag. Because if you take a white light and shoot it at the side, I'll see every repair you made on that wall.
Yeah, you see the fresh paint.
Oh yeah, now you can see the cracks, and I can see where you tried to float it. And there's only a few people in the country that can actually get away with that. It's very hard to trick the white light. Fire damage, anything like this, that's what we're looking for. We'll get into some more of that in a moment. They'll say, oh, we had a minor fire. That's not minor. But these are the things as you're walking around doing your AVI and considering these listings, these are the things that you're absolutely allowed to look for. Anything about a fire? Nothing. Nothing. And it burnt the whole basement. It took out the redwood hard floors. And then they put laminate. Obviously, when you walk into these houses, you're like, wow, we have laminate in a house in 1902? Why don't you have the redwoods exposed? Well, because they were burnt. That's fire damage. There's a big difference. One was on fire and the other one was exposed to the heat and the smoke. So if you're walking around and you're in the garage, typically you'll see this stuff in the garage. Oh, we had a little fire. And if you look, okay, just discolored the wood, no big deal. I'm going to write it as smoke damage. But if I see the pieces charred like that, that was actually on fire. Come to find out, house was built in 1942. In 1995, a rogue roofer comes in and said he's going to float the ridge line and butchered it. And then a flipper bought it in 2017, flipped it, and then sold it. She went to sell it, and I was the buyer's inspector. And I saw that, and I stopped it. You need an engineer. Structural engineer came out, quoted $125,000 to fix it. Stopped the sale, and immediately ignited the lawsuit. It's pending right now. This is always my favorite. I just had one of these earlier today. When they paint the termite damage. I love this part. I'm telling you, I'm not supposed to tear it up. I'm not supposed to do the shot. But if I see that, I'm going to rip it apart and then take a picture of it. You'll see things like that. Look for the distortion. Obviously, the nails are painted. It's just junk.
So this is a listing history that you can kind of see.
So closed for 511. This was after the flipper had it. I didn't have a full history here, but they had bought it for significantly cheaper, flipped it, sold it, so I could see the history. It was very brief, right? And it got sold. It was pending. It came back, and then it expired. And so now it went back again at 500, significantly less. This is when it sold. But when you look at the transaction history, if you see a lot of sales, especially if they're within 4 or 5 months or less, it's a good chance that a flipper had it. Not necessarily that's always bad, but it just tells you, okay, be a heads up and look for red flag issues. The tax records don't match the listing, right? You see this house was 1,055 square feet, 3 bedroom, 1 full bath, 1 half bath. Now it's 1,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths, so it got chopped up a little bit. Additionally, it said, they had converted the garage is what had happened, but they were still advertising that it was a garage too. So it's like they're double counting the garage as living space and garage space in this listing. This one over here is a 4 bedroom, 1,668 square feet, 1 full, 1 half bath. And then they converted to 3 bedrooms and 3 full baths, same square footage, right?
And this is a house, as of a few days ago, that was on the market, but probably went pending. But they bought it for $975. You can see that the roof is okay, but right here, there's no gutters, right? No gutters. And then you can see that the earth is worn right here. I don't know what was there, and still right here. So they put in new sliders and new windows, and they cleaned up some landscaping, but there's still no gutters. And so water comes off this roof, it sits here, and I can't tell from this picture, but this kind of looks like it's sloped towards the house. Over a year, it's no big deal. Over 20 or 30 years, the 10 rains that we have a year add up. And then you're getting gallons and hundreds of gallons of water coming off of a roof like that with no gutters that are diverted the water away from the property. It sits next to the property. It slowly erodes the earth. It sinks. Planter boxes, these are all the rage back in the day, but you see like planter boxes right up against the house, right in these little gaps, right like this, and that just holds water, right? And so like I was mentioning with like a retaining wall, there's no weep holes in this. It just holds water and it sits there. And they're watering it because they want pretty flowers and a little garden right there, right up against their house. But that's water sitting right against the exterior of your property. HOAs, this is, if you don't know what you're looking for, hire someone that does to make sure that there's reserves, because that's what this joke is. Oh, our dues are only $35 a month, because they don't have anything fixed. Typically, condos will have schedules, right? A roof is good for 25, 30 years, so they have a budget so that they know when the roof is up, they have the $150,000 it takes to replace that roof. Same with the concrete, same with the landscaping, same with all the things that are material. Same with, in high-rises, elevators. Those need constant service and upgrades. So you'll see condos have big reserves. People complain about them, but very small portions of that go to the management. The rest is to maintaining the building. So it doesn't look like these crappy things, and you have something that you can sell when you're ready to sell it. Other concerns, I mentioned this earlier, relisting a property that you sell to a flipper that you know has issues, and if it wasn't fixed properly and you can't disclose that, that's going to be an issue. Right? Mold mitigation, you see this often, right? You get mold, water intrudes, it gets mold, that's just a common thing. So there's no shortage of environmental companies that will do testing, air testing, and see if there's mold, and then they'll give you specific instructions. Nearby factors, you hear this a lot too. It's like, if you're living near a hospital, if you've got noisy neighbors, if you're near a car mechanic shop, or if you're near, a military base where there's explosions from Pendleton, and they're like, what are these booming sounds? You've got to disclose those kind of things. Same if you're near Montgomery Airport and you're selling a house in Serra Mesa, there's planes flying overhead. Settling, we talked about the settling. One of the key ways, if you're not seeing the cracks, is if doors and windows aren't opening and closing. Or if you try to pop a door open, it's stuck, or it won't close, I bet you they didn't build it that way, right? So something moved over time. Like AJ said, you don't want to guesstimate how much a repair costs if you don't know. But at least you could say, hey, these are problems and we think we could solve them, and here's why, right? And then, make sure your inspector goes into the crawl space, goes into the attic, goes into the, goes on the roof. If you have an inspector that isn't willing to do those things, they probably should be doing a different job. But you got to get those spots checked out because that's where you find the most issues.
Yes, disclose, disclose, disclose. Make sure, if there's a question, put it in there. Like, more often than not, the hit that you're going to take on the price is not going to be significant enough to offset the disclosure. We all know we have a duty to disclose anything that materially affects the value of the property. Materially affecting the value of the property, that's obviously a subjective opinion. It's defined as it would affect a reasonably prudent buyer's decision to purchase. That's the disclosure standard. It comes out of common law, which is just kind of the way that the courts have interpreted things. It also comes as an affirmative duty through your disclosure statements, and we'll get into that in a second. So Brian asked me a question: if somebody doesn't disclose, and then the inspector finds it, is there liability to the seller? And the answer is probably not. Probably not. The reasonable inspection, otherwise visible or observable to the buyer, a reasonable inspection would have revealed this. If there's a hole in the front door, I don't need to put that on my disclosure statement. It's obvious. It's a reasonable inspection would have revealed that problem. So that's a common defense, which was the case in this instance, to a non-disclosure law. So a lot of times, if a buyer backs out and there's an inspection, the seller will be like, I don't want to even look at the report. This happens all the time, right? Like they're like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to know about it. And this is also a little bit dangerous from a seller's perspective because the standard isn't just whether you knew about it, it's whether you knew or should have known about it. So I think that's a dangerous proposition to take, is to try and insulate yourself from liability by not taking the inspection report because you think it would somehow exonerate you in a lawsuit. Like the inspection report, and so when we're thinking about sources of liability, and this is why these cases get so messy, right? You can have the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the party who sold the property, and the broker, all with different counsel, all with different levels of liability, and all with different issues in terms of what makes liability for them. So the inspector, really what you're concerned about here is going to be for negligence. Like, did they properly perform the responsibilities? If they missed the crack in the foundation, if they don't do something that they were supposed to do, and it's below what we would call the standard of care, then if they don't observe something that should have otherwise been visible to an observable or observable to the buyer, something that is patent or within the scope of things, that can create liability for the inspector. I'll tell you, we talked a little bit about this, right? You have a fiduciary obligation to your seller, but at the same time, you can have exposure for failure to list or disclose known defects. There's an AVID form that you do sign where you have to actually do that, and there's also other issues. And the listing agent, of course, we're talking about the inspection. This, I think, is a very common area for liability, probably. When you're talking about filling out that disclosure statement, it actually isn't the realtor that signs that disclosure statement. It actually is the owner of the property that signs that. Affirmative fraud versus concealment, and this really ties well into this, because usually when you see affirmative fraud, it is in the disclosure statement. Did you ever repair or is there any cracks in the foundation? No, right? And so there's an affirmative misrepresentation at that point in time. Versus concealment might be just the omission of something that you know is material, but maybe not even covered in some of the disclosure forms. The person that died, or the ghost. I don't know. There's a million of these things. Like there's just like these crazy things that even I don't think about. So they impose upon you this non-delegable duty of care. So, and this is where a lot of realtors, I think, I don't want to say they get tripped up, but they're like, oh, I told him to go do this, or I relied on somebody else to take care of that. And this stuff will come back to you as the listing, or as the buyer's representative, because of the nature of this and this duty of care. So we talked a little bit about breach of fiduciary versus fraud versus contract. And the real main difference there is the contract stuff is really between the buyer and the seller, for the most part, not exclusively. It's between the buyer and the seller, right? If there's an affirmative misrepresentation, that will stick to the contract and will stick to the two parties in the contract.